Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Beacon of Light podcast this evening. Tonight, we're with Dewayne Hinnett, and this is going to be an awesome conversation because what he has to share, it's a great perspective, and I can't wait to show it all to you. But before we talk to him, we are going to jump into this.
I'm April Tribe Juke. Welcome to the Beacon of Light podcast. I believe we are all made with light, and light is hope. This podcast brings authors who write stories of hope to all of you. Your journey to be inspired and amplified by these stories starts now.
And we're back. So, Dewayne Hinnett, we are here to talk about what's called the ripple effect. And like you can see running on the ticker underneath, this is his book. And there was a quote that he put down there, and it is not a they problem, but it is a
people say that it's their problem when it comes to domestic violence. They are the one that's having the problems. They are the one that's going through it. It's not, because it's actually a social issue. Domestic violence touches a lot of issues as far as social, economic, a lot of things. So when we talk about, domestic violence, it's just not someone else's problem. It's our problem. We have to fix it as a community.
That's right. And in fixing that as a community, from the perspective of a man's side of things, your book, The Ripple Effect, tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book.
Well, I wrote it. My story is that I've been married 4 times, and each of my relationships, there was always an issue, an underlying issue that I could never figure out. So when each time that in a relationship, sometimes you have to take a step back and do an evaluation, see what the common denominator was. So I saw that one of the common denominators in it is that all the women that I married, the women that I chose to be with in a relationship, they all came from domestic violence relationships previously, or later on that, or much earlier in their dating lifestyle. So I looked at it as, there are some things where I didn't know how to talk to some people or address them in some ways. One of the things that my current wife said is that when I met her, she said she was always waiting for the next shoe to drop. And in a relationship, you shouldn't have that kind of tension going on. Some the women that I married, except for my current wife, they weren't healed from it. So it brought a lot of issues where we had communication issues, we had trust issues, we had all kind of issues that you can think of that was related to domestic violence. So when it came to me and me doing a self-evaluation of it, I needed to be a better person in realizing who I was dating or marrying, and go from there. Because like I said, it's not domestic violence is the worst relationship that you could be in. So you take that part of it, and that you still have unresolved trauma, unresolved healing that came from it. And the person that's been in it hasn't been settled with it. So they're not going to be settled in the next relationship they go in, or the next one after that, until they resolve that trauma. So in order for me to not pile on it, I needed to learn better as far as that, how to actually, communicate with them, or actually, communicate with them as far as, certain things that their understanding was.
Right. And in that understanding, I'm sure that the problem of not being healed from that, it ripples out, right? Because now it's impacted this relationship, and then possible children, and then where we've got families relating together, it's still rippling out. And so the responsibility of finding healing and working on that, and doing, like you said, the self-evaluations for yourself in this ripple effect. You also talk about how the they problem over there, if we just leave it there, nothing is going to fix. It's just going to keep compounding the problem. And so how do we accept it into an our problem? Like, how do we accept that and as a society look at it and bring it in, because this is a tough topic.
Well, as a community, like I said, how do we as a community accept it? Because, like I said, domestic violence touches so many other issues. It touches homelessness. It touches financial abuse or financial poverty. It touches things like mental illness or mental health. It touches things as far as childhood trauma. So with domestic violence, well, one instance of domestic violence can touch those many social issues. That's why we need to come together as a community and talk about how to fix it.
Right. And what are some of your proposals of how to fix this? Like, where do we start? What do we do?
Well, one of the main things is more resources need to be put into domestic violence. In my town only, which is my town in my county, there's only one domestic violence shelter. One domestic violence in a pretty big in North, and I live in North Carolina, and we are the second largest city in North Carolina. So in my one county, there's only one domestic violence shelter. So we don't have resources that match it. So you have resources for mental illness, but you don't have resources for mental illness from domestic violence. You have resources for homelessness or poverty, but you don't have resources that tells you how to deal with homelessness or poverty that came from domestic violence, because financial abuse is one thing that comes out of domestic violence. So you have an abuser who controls all the purse strings, controls all the money that comes in, the bills and stuff like that. And if the survivor wants to leave, they have to pretty much pack up and leave with nothing but their clothes on their back and their children. So you're not only taking someone that's been through trauma, you're causing them financial poverty because they have to leave their situation because they don't have control of their own finances.
Right. It really, really compounds the problems. So, in your ripple effect book, what is something that you offer to help people when they read this book?
Well, I wrote it from a novice point of view, because when I came into domestic violence, I came in it with novice eyes. I came from a two-parent family home. I have three older sisters, two of which were married long term. So I never saw domestic violence at all. I didn't see any, hitting or any abuse or anything like that going on. So I came in with the eyesight of, pretty much everybody else. Why don't a person just leave if they're being abused? Sounds so easy, right? Sounds so not so hard to do. Uh, so when I first experienced, domestic violence, it was when I was working for a job at the city of Durham, and I was actually a co-chair for a domestic violence task force. So I would open up and see files and stuff like that where people were requesting help, services, resources, and everything like that. And then you see it on the news. And once you get through reading the files and how domestic violence affect, then you start seeing how it affects people in your own circle. So family members, friends, coworkers. I started seeing instances where, you know, domestic violence was, in their relationships.
Wow. And looking at it from that, where you didn't experience it growing up, and looking to say now we can see this is impactful. It's really true because so many people have that. It's logical, right? If you're in trouble, you need to leave. If someone's pounding on you, you need to leave. Sure, of course that is the logic. How that actually happens, you can leave with, and then you got to get the list out, right? Got to
Right.
financially get yourself together. You have to make an exit plan. You've got to have all of these other steps beforehand so that you can leave. And you learned all of this, being in a domestic violence task force. That's a huge thing to really like start to connect these dots to see why is this happening, what is going on. I'm curious to find out, um, from the man's perspective here, being on that task force, were there times where you wanted to just sit with the guys and say, what's going on? Like, why are you doing this to this particular, person, to your relationship? Have you ever had those moments or opportunities?
Once I was on the task force, I became solely vested into the survivor. So it was never until I actually got to the other side of this, because I wrote my vantage point from the eyes of a female being abused in a relationship, and what I saw and how I could help the female that was being abused in a relationship. So my vantage point from whenever I wrote this book was just strictly on that. Now that I've wrote the book, done more speaking engagements, talked to a lot of other people, I see where you have to come in and you have to bring more men involved into this, because we're not just trying to solve the survivors part of it, but we're trying to stop other abusers from being made.
Right. That prevention portion is so, so big. It takes a lot of education and a lot of good structures, but it can be done. We've seen successful pockets of this around the country. And really, the educational side of preventative measures really can work. And it's one of those things, right? If someone's bleeding, you're going to help them. You're not going to be like, oh well,
Right.
sorry, right? Bleeding, meaning if you're in the abuse and the situation, the survivor, of course you're going to get there, help them, try that out. And like you said, after being exposed to all this, you do start to see the other side of the story of like, wow, how can we prevent this? We've got all these young kids, or these young boys, these young men, these teenagers coming up, and if they're looking at this is normal, this is what you do. How do we interrupt that? That like,
Right.
not normal. And you can attest to it to yourself. You're like, I grew up completely different. This is not how it has to be. And so, it's pretty powerful, and it's interesting to see these small kind of groups pop up and start with it, and helping our younger kids and our teenagers. And I have seen a few, granted this is a small group, where abusers themselves have kind of had that, I don't know how to call it other than male magic. When the dudes get together and talk, there's just something about that, whether it's a stereotypical kind of approach, whether it's just the guy to guy kind of thing, there's something that changes. And in places where they can open up and start to share, we have seen change happen. And the survivor is not a part of that at all. It has to be completely separate, because they got crap to work on, and these guys have healing to heal from. And I think looking at it on both sides, that both humanity, both men and women are valued, they're important, their lives matter. So how do we help on both sides? And I'm not saying one organization should help on both sides. I think organizations to help one and to help the other are fine and needed. But that goes back to the community, right? And if you have in such a large city only one place, that's not enough. Right? It's just not enough.
It's not enough. And from the male standpoint, it's about taking accountability. It's about taking accountability for your own. If you have, women in your family, it's about taking accountability for your community. It's about taking accountability as being a protector of anything. We're as men, we're natural protectors anyway. We're natural protectors and providers. So if you dive into that part of it, you never want to see you never want to see any harm come to those that belong to you. You don't want to see anything that comes to your community, because that actually does have a ripple effect in your community.
That's right.
A murder has a ripple effect in your community. Domestic violence has a ripple effect in your community. You have this man or some person that's going around that's abusing your community. They're not going to stop there with that one woman or that one person. They're going to continue to do that throughout your community. Now that's putting damage and trauma throughout your whole community. So it's about being accountable for that. We need to be as men, like I said, we need to be accountable for that. If we're talking about protecting our communities, this is where it starts at, right here.
Exactly, it does. It starts right there, and I'm glad that as you're saying this information, it is really important, and I hope people pay attention to this, because it is so, so, so important. We tend to go on the extremes and say, well, these types of people can abuse as well, and these type of people can abuse as well. That's true, but those percentages are so small. We've got this bulk here that we got to look at, and not go to these fringe sites, but look here. And as a natural protector, as a natural provider, it starts within that community there. I'll never forget the time I was in Las Vegas, where we're waiting in line to eat at some fancy restaurant, and we watched a woman come in. I say woman, she looked like a teenager, but she was still young. Came in with somebody who was, you got that feeling of like, I think something's going to happen here. And sure enough, she said something that he didn't like. And she was up against that wall so fast in a chokehold in front of all of these people. And you could see immediately the groups that would shut down look the other way. And then you saw some of the men stand up and approach, and she kind of calmed him down, and they ended up leaving. But when those four men stood up and surrounded him, he stopped. And it was shocking to have it be so public, and just watching who was in the room, who hid, who turned, who approached, and who helped. So I think it's just getting in, getting involved, and this is messy stuff. It is hard. There's no perfect thing. There's no solution that's going to be step 1, 2, or 3. It's not like that, because we're
Right.
emotional. Violence is about control and power in so many ways. Whether you had suffered from past trauma and now you're expressing that, whether you have never felt in control in your life, so you're going to control something else. There are variables there, but the outcome is still abuse, and that's what we're trying to stop, right? That's
Right.
not okay. So, in your community, with just this one shelter, what do you have to help offer, or what do you do now to help in these situations?
Well, what I do now, I offer our services. I'm part of a nonprofit that deals with domestic violence. It's called Survivors with a Testimony, or SWAT for short. So I am the chair of that nonprofit. So I offer any services. So I offer services as far as helping someone get out of a situation, find housing, getting mental health issues, or education and prevention. Um, the one thing that we want to do is educate the community and do prevention. So we want to educate everyone about the different areas of abuse and domestic violence, and to bring the community together and solving this. Because, like I said, if you have an issue of someone that's been, mental illness or mental health, find out the root cause is domestic violence. I mean, if you're not solving that part of it or healing that trauma of it, then what are you doing? And if you have someone that's homeless because of domestic violence, and you're not telling them, hey, do this so you don't have to, this doesn't happen again. Because a lot of abusers, not only it takes a long time for them to get away from their abuser, but they also pick the same kind of person too, just in a different body.
Right. It be because they haven't healed, and they think maybe this one time it'll be different. But we know the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. And so the education side on both things for the survivor and preventative measures is really, really important. That those healing steps. I know you've probably been a part of many Facebook groups, or other kinds of chat groups, where sometimes it's just talking about the complaining, the problems, the cycle again and again. And then towards the end of the comments, they'll say something like, but a warm body is better than no body. And you're like, "Hmm,
Yeah, or a piece of man is better than no man.
right, it's just going to repeat again." And the insecurities, the unhealed trauma from the past, or whatever it is that they might be suffering with mental health or emotional instability, the emotional instability, whatever it is, that part has to be able to heal. So, do your services help with that for survivors?
Correct. So our services, like I said, I didn't want to leave any area as far as domestic violence. And in my book, it has a lot of areas of domestic violence that I cover in it. So as far as services, I didn't want to leave any services that could be left out, because, like I said, domestic violence has so many other forms, with it, that if you don't address, all together, sometimes there's going to be a breakdown in it.
Right. And in that breakdown, then unfortunately the cycle does
The
repeat
cycle
again.
comes back again,
It
right?
does. It does. So, have you had successes with your structure with this nonprofit?
I've had successes. Um, the one area that I think that that I have trouble with is being a male and being in charge of a domestic violence, um, being part of a domestic violence nonprofit. Um, a lot of people don't know. When I first got involved in advocacy, I was just looking to help any kind of way. I would say, hey, look, let me help, let me do something. I just want to help out because I saw it as an issue that was in my community. So I would get either, turned away or not get answered and stuff like that. Um, you know, so actually me coming into this organization was just on a humbug. I actually did a podcast just like this, and the person, my executive director of Vanita Council Howard, she saw me up there, and we were like-minded as far as what we want to do with domestic violence and how we wanted to fix the problem. So we came together, and I joined a nonprofit, and I became the chair. Um, and that's how it's gone so far. But as far as domestic violence and as far as the male side of it, we need to be included in this conversation. That's just not an ego thing. That's just saying that, hey, if 90% of abusers look like me, don't you think it would be a good idea to include some male perspective on it, some male advocacy on it, some male prevention, some male education on it, just to balance it out. Just like I said, just so we're not making more abusers.
Right. And that idea of prevention and helping so that we're not, quote, making more. That's huge. It's such a big thing. In doing a a conference in April, they had a fantastic panel where there were three men on the panel who worked similarly like you, and they knew they had to be involved, and they'd been doing different kinds of parts of support and of education and prevention for about 20 years. And they shared some of their perspectives, some of their stories, perspectives had kind of shifted a little bit. And it was just really interesting to hear from the male's point of view of how really they can make the difference within the community, make the difference within the education and the prevention with our small boys, with our teenagers, and with our young adults. It was encouraging, and they all three said at least one time in this panel, but we didn't think we were getting anywhere. It was really, really tough because very, very similar to what you mentioned, the trust issues, the challenges there, but they also emphasize, same what you did, if 90% look like me, we should be a part of this. And so they kept going, and now their voices, become that, almost like that expert, right? And so that is a huge piece to really help other people to make the changes in the community to change. So thank you so much, Dewayne, for doing this. And the ripple effect on domestic violence, his book, it's available on Amazon. You can get it there. Are there other places that we can get your book, Dewayne?
Yeah, you can get it on Barnes and Noble too. You can email me at authorcdh@gmail.com, and I can send you out a copy. You can find me on Facebook on C Dewayne Hennett, Facebook, or you can find me on Instagram too, C Dewayne Hennett as well.
Awesome, awesome. Now, before we let you go, I know that you have a another support group that you've been working on, and the timing on this with the podcast is fantastic because you can start this in June. Is that right?
That is correct. We are starting a support group. It's called My Village. Um, excuse me. And one of the things that I thought of as far as our service were that when it comes to domestic violence, you don't have a lot of support because domestic violence usually starts off with isolation. So you're cut off from your community, you're cut off from your family, you're cut off from your friends. So you don't have a lot of people that's in your circle that can either sympathize with you, that are around, that can help. So with the my village is to give people, survivors and people that are in a domestic violence relationship, support. So they'll know, number one, they'll know that they're not alone. Two, they'll know how to get out, and three, that they have support services.
Right. And within those three categories right there, huge part of how all this works. So join his Facebook group, become part of my village, and and see how you can help somebody, because just by the sheer numbers of 1 in 4 women being in abuse, you know someone. Whether you want to acknowledge that or not, you know someone, whether it's at work, whether it's family member, whether it is a friend, a coworker. And so joining groups like this to learn information is hugely supportive. So Dewayne, as we're closing this up tonight, your last 2 minutes towards the world, what is it that you would like to share tonight?
Um, I want to share that, for anybody that's out there that may be going through a domestic violence, in a domestic violence relationship, you're not alone. There are people out there that can help you. There are people out there that want to help you. Um, I would say to you is that reach out, find someone that can help you. Support is nearby. It's just a matter of knowing, or knowing when to go, when to leave. And I can tell you this right now: once the abuse starts, it only escalates from here. It may start off as something small as yelling or being really possessive or jealous, but eventually it'll end up into, physical abuse. So we urge anybody that is in a domestic violence relationship or abusive relationship, get out, get help. There are people out here to help you, and I'm one of them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dwayne. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight on this Beacon of Light podcast. And remember his book, The Ripple Effect, and get it, read through it, support other people, be a part of this, because it will change communities. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.